Welcome to the Dark Academicals, the podcast where we delve into the mythos of dark academia one book at a time. I'm Sarah Purnell.
And I'm Sophie Waters, and today we're looking at Meg Wolitzer's debut novel, Sleepwalking. So before we start, trigger warnings for suicide, talk of suicide. It's not on page, but it is permeating the entire novel, and death of a sibling. Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton and Lucy Ascher, three young, troubled poets who ended their lives in tragic circumstances, are idolised by Claire, Naomi and Lauren, the death girls of Swarthmore College. The girls dress in black, read and reread their poets, meet for all-night readings and musings, and are obsessed with the lives and deaths of Plath, Sexton and Ascher. When Claire falls into a relationship with an upperclassman named Julian, her grasp on herself and on Lucy change and mutate until she undertakes drastic measures to find out what it all really means. What's that?
Such an odd book.
It is, and I don't think that the summary fully describes what the book is actually about.
No.
That's actually one of the criticisms I kind of want to talk about a bit later.
Okay.
Was kind of, what you're sold isn't quite what you get.
Mm-hmm.
But I really, really loved it. I read it all in one go, and I just got totally swept up in it, even though it wasn't quite what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And Meg Wolitzer's writing is just phenomenal.
I mean, right off the bat, I was like, the writing is just stunning.
Yeah. And a debut novel as well.
I know.
At 23. Sickening, honestly.
It really is a thing. It's...
Because I think...
One heck of a book.
It really is. And I think the only thing that we've read by Meg Wolitzer before is Belzar, which we've both read, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I kind of knew to expect some kind of aspect of psychological something with an academic setting and that stunning writing. But that was pretty much all I went into the book with, because it's not a book where you really see anywhere.
No.
It's a bit of an under the radar one. I mean, we had to import it from the US and it's not even available on Kindle. So it's definitely an interesting book to look at, I think.
Yeah.
So as ever, we are going to look at what makes Sleepwalking a Dark Academia title, if it is in fact a Dark Academia title. So first up on the list is a higher education setting, often on campus and usually elite or exclusive in some way. Yes, but no.
It starts off that way. It starts off strong as a Dark Academia title for me, like in general.
Same here,
yeah. Because although, I mean, there's not a strong sense of place with Swarthmore as an academic setting, but you feel it because the characters are so engrossed in their particular subject.
Yeah, there's lots of time spent in dorm rooms, in libraries. They kind of have, like all-night poetry reading parties in their dorms, and it is that very kind of enclosed academic setting at first, isn't it?
Yeah.
But for probably 2/3 of the novel, we actually head from Pennsylvania to Long Island.
Long Island, yeah.
Yeah, to the beach, in a kind of well-loved house on the beach, and the vibe of the setting changes completely, and I think that is the stronger setting, isn't it?
Yeah.
There is a contrast between the two, but I think it does take away that element of Dark Academia by moving the setting. It's a lot more fresh, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think potentially you could get away with it if she was still kind of studying, in like the same sense that in The Secret History we have the group move to like the is it Charles's house?
Oh, summer house, yeah.
The summer house. But they're still kind of obsessing over like the Greek stuff, and whereas here, even though she's still obviously preoccupied with her subject, it's kind of moved more into kind of this psychological exploration of the self rather than the subjects.
Yeah, it's very internal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like, Swarthmore is like is a private liberal arts college, all kind of mid-1800s. It's got all of the bare bones of what it should be, and then we kind of get ripped away from it.
Yeah.
So I was actually a little bit disappointed. But never mind. And I guess that carries on into old Gothic architecture, because we don't really get any physical descriptions of the college, do we?
No, not really.
But I kind of...
I just kind of end up filling it in, don't you? You kind of get like this sense of it without it ever being explicitly told to you what it is.
Yeah.
And you kind of just fill it in with your mind from like your previous knowledge of similar settings.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of just filled it in with like the old traditional fancy New England colleges.
Yeah.
With the kind of very cliquey kind of student base and the kind of fancy drawing rooms of paintings. And yeah, that's kind of how I filled it in, but we don't really know. And then the beach house is a traditional beach house, isn't it? Very kind of warm and worn and well loved. It's like there's life in there, but also like sadness and grief in this house, which again have those like elements of dark academia in the atmospheres of the house, but I just don't think it's the right location.
No.
It obviously works in the story, but for our purposes, doesn't quite tick the boxes for me.
So a preoccupation with classical studies, and usually this is Latin, Greek, literature or philosophy. Not necessarily classical studies, because the poets that they're not even necessarily studying them, they're just obsessed with them. They're not, they're all quite recent in terms of literature.
Yeah. I actually looked up kind of, obviously, so Lucy Ascher is Wolitzer's kind of imagined poet, and she is the main poet that is focused on by Claire. But Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath are both confessional poets. And I think that is a very different type of academic study, isn't it?
Yeah.
So as opposed to if you were studying Keats or Blake, they would be the classical kind of poet study, which I think would fit in more clearly. But, you know, I mean, Plath lived in the 50s, 40s, 60s, like that area. That's not a word. She kind of lived and worked in that era. I'm not quite sure about Anne Sexton, actually.
No, I'm not 100.
I don't think I've ever read her.
I think what I thought was interesting, and I think we'll probably touch more on like the kind of like female perspective and feminism later a bit more in depth, but the classical studies as a whole are a very male space.
Yeah.
And I think to pick these particular poets was a very clever choice, because it's a very female space. It's a very like the female experience, women's pain.
Yeah. And I think
before
that plays...
kind of it was invisible. Like it didn't have a voice, and it's only in like recent decades that it's actually been given a chance to say its bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that kind of female focus as well plays into how the three girls are seen on campus. So they're called the Death Girls, because these three poets, they all were very troubled and they all committed suicide, and the girls dress in black and they kind of unintentionally at first imitate their poets. And I think that's that way that they're criticised. They're ostracised, aren't they, by their classmates, by the teachers, by their parents. And I do think that is a commentary on like the feminist aspect, isn't it? The kind of sidelining of female experience. So it's a very clever way to turn that academic study into a female focus, which I did really appreciate that. So next up is murder. And there is no murder.
No.
but there is
death.
There is a lot of death. Not on page, but there are, talk of the suicides of the poet and the death of a sibling, and that's kind of present throughout, isn't it? And the grief as well. The grief is almost a character.
Yeah.
In the novel itself. I thought it was interesting, actually, the way Wolitzer took Claire's imitation of Lucy. She didn't actually make Claire suicidal or anything. In fact, she says several times, although I follow Lucy's journey, like, I've never got to that point. That's not where I am.
No.
She's like, I feel lots of the things that she feels, and I'm very depressed and life is very empty, but I've never considered that. I thought that was a really interesting choice, because I was expecting it to go in that direction of her following in Lucy and Plath and Sexton's footsteps. Yeah.
So there's not obviously the expected aspect of some form of murder, but there's definitely a lot of death, and I suppose depending on how you view it, you could argue that the women that took their lives in this book, even though it's not on page, like, they were failed in some way. I'm not saying they obviously weren't murdered, but they were failed in some way that led them to that.
Yeah, and even the girls themselves, to an extent, really. Claire especially, because we don't really know much about Lauren and Naomi, even though they're supposed to be also a focus of the novel. But more on that in a minute. Because she is continually failed by her parents, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's pushed aside and ignored and told to kind of buck up and stop being obsessed, instead of actually getting to the root of what's going on. And I think if Claire's kind of mental state was different, that could have led her to the same position as the three poets.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of drawing in the community that Claire has, even though it's very small. She has her two friends. She has Lucy's parents.
She has Julian.
And they're all kind of keeping her on the other side of the line, aren't they, really?
Yeah.
And it kind of suggests, I don't know a huge amount about Anne Sexton. I know a little about Plath, but they didn't kind of have the same support system.
No.
So yeah, that basically does lead into the fact that there is in fact a dark, moody and or haunting vibe.
Definitely. This book is haunted. It's haunted. Yeah. It feels haunted. And I think she even even when she's at Lucy Ascher's house in her bedroom, I think there is a moment, isn't it, where she kind of acknowledges that perhaps the ghost of Lucy, or like the feeling of her, is kind of gone because she's more superior to it now. And I kind of got that it was just her obviously moving through her kind of like mental awareness of where she was and who she is. But
it was very clever.
Yeah.
Because when she first moves into the house, she's like, Lucy, because she hears or feels something, and then when she moves into Lucy's bedroom, she eclipses it. It's creepy, but she wasn't creeped out because she was so involved.
Yeah.
So kind of entangled with the idea of Lucy, especially at this point that she's, living in her house. That it was haunting as a reader, but not for the character. And that is skill. I want to read everything of Meg Wolitzer now. Because her writing is just so clever.
Yeah, hero worship of a particular figure or author.
I reckon we can say yes on that one, quite comfortably.
Big tick on that one.
We have already talked about that, like, kind of hero worship of those three poets. But I also think there is a clear worship of Claire on Julian's part.
And then also of her friend, is it Naomi, who goes to Julian and is like, why are we attracted to people like Claire? Do you know what, like when she says, can you please help? Like, why are we drawn to people like Claire?
I can't remember which of the girls it is, but
Me neither.
because we don't get to know them at all. They're not really
No.
distinct characters in a way, are they?
Not really. But
but
yeah, there's
yeah, there
definitely, and then I suppose as well, Lucy's parents kind of come to not necessarily hero worship on the same level, but they definitely hold her in quite a high position for what
Yeah.
she's done for them.
Yeah, she's kind of filled the gap of Lucy, hasn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, she kind of steps into that role, fills that gap of Lucy, and almost gives them a second burst of life.
Yeah.
And they're very, very grateful, and they kind of accept her into that role without really questioning it. I also think it's really interesting that we start the book with Julian.
I thought that too.
Because I was really surprised. I didn't expect that kind of start. And in fact, he talks about being drawn to her.
Yeah, I think it definitely, at first I was a little bit, definitely like taken aback by that.
Yeah.
But then it does put Claire in that focus of like being someone who is idolised as much as she idolises someone else. It gives you that lens from the beginning.
And also that distance.
Yeah.
Which we see a lot in The Secret History.
Yeah.
It's like they exist above you kind of thing. You can't quite reach the pillar of their, whether it's academic level, their psychotic level in terms of Henry, or, you know, whatever way you want to look at it. And I think Julian is fascinated by Claire. He's interested in this whole like cult of the Death Girls that they've got going on. He doesn't know about her because she doesn't give anything at first, but he wants to be a part of this. He wants to get to know this kind of weird group of girls, which is an interesting kind of introduction to the main characters.
Yeah.
Because I think he even says at some point, like, no one knows them, doesn't he? Like, you can't get to know them because they don't let you. He had heard she was unapproachable. Talking to her is like talking to the Ice Queen. Some real persistence. Speaking of Ice Queens, we have weather as a literary device. And it kind of...
Yeah, it does pop up a couple of times, like the weather kind of plays a part, but it's not in the kind of same sense in like, again, in like The Secret History, the way the snow has a big impact on
everything.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a background element, isn't it? It's a cold winter, and there's the change of the feel of the winter when she arrives in Long Island at the beach, and turning up kind of covered in snow. And there's even one of the girls, she just completely shuts down, doesn't she, and just sits in the snowbank for ages. So it is there. It's not a character in its own right.
No.
It doesn't do anything to progress the plot or inhibit it or change the characters. It's just kind of there.
It's often very fitting. So like, it will fit the kind of mood that's already established.
Yeah, but it doesn't help to create that mood.
No.
Which is what we usually look for in Dark Academia. Next, we have old money, which will collide with new money or no money. I think this is mostly absent, really, isn't it?
I think the only time you ever hear much mention of money, I think, is Claire's mum when she says, what are you going to do with this expensive education?
Yeah.
But it's not like, oh, we can't afford it, or, it's a waste of money, or...
Yeah.
You don't get the sense that money is an issue for any of the characters.
No. I think, they're at a private liberal arts college in America. They're all fairly well off.
Yeah.
And that's not really an issue. And it's not discussed because they're all pretty much in the same position, aren't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, because I think like discussions of that would have played quite well into like the feminism aspects if that had been pursued, but it was just kind of not. It was just a non-issue.
Yeah. So finally, we have underdeveloped social skills, or the protagonist is portrayed as an outsider.
They are 100% outsiders.
All of them. All of them. All of them don't have great... has any of them got any great social skills?
Not really.
Really. Even the adults are highly inept.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you know, they're set apart as the Death Girls. They're kind of looked upon by everyone else. But they're not really kind of involved in anything. Their parents set them apart. Their classmates set them apart. Their teachers set them apart. I think that's one of the biggest dark academia elements in this novel, is the kind of these outsiders forming their own group of outsiders and finding comfort and reassurance in that circle.
Yeah. And then being recognised as like, oh, they're the such and such.
Yeah.
So like, they become revered almost.
Yeah. It's like cult status, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day. I think a lot of dark academia is very culty.
Yeah.
In that way. But even though they are kind of set apart from everyone else, they actually don't really have very much interaction with anyone else in the novel.
No.
The characters are very limited. It's very, I was going to say internal, but I don't think that's the right word.
Insular.
That's the one. Yeah, because we don't meet any of their teachers, really. We see classmates in passing. We have some flashbacks and memories of other characters.
Yeah.
But every time that happens, that confirms them as outsiders, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a very small cast of characters. Because you've got the three poets, but we only really see Lucy on the page, don't we?
Yeah.
Her parents, we have the three girls, we have Julian, and we have Claire's mum. So that's what, 8 characters?
And then we have Seth as well, but obviously he's passed away. But he...
Oh, yeah, he does speak on page, doesn't he? Yeah. Yeah, so very small cast. But I guess that adds to that cloying feeling.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Of and Claire feeling trapped as well. So I think we're next going to look at the criticisms and interpretation of isolated elements. And my biggest issue with this novel was the element of kind of it being missold in the summary, I think, for me.
It's marketed in a very strange way compared to what you get.
Yeah. I really liked what we got. I loved this book.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily what was promised.
No, because there's a kind of focus on the Death Girls as a group and kind of their kind of academic revering of the poets. And while that is there, it's only sprinkled in at the beginning. We focus on Claire, Lucy, and Lucy's parents. They're the main characters of the novels. And those relationships between the 4 of them, which isn't what we're told.
Yeah, it's definitely a book about the child-parent relationship.
Yeah.
Very
Very specifically,
but
yeah.
But I also on the back it says about how her affair with Julian is like the catalyst for and I don't get that at all, because she does nothing but push him away constantly. She doesn't seem to have like a epiphany through having been with Julian. I think obviously he has a part in it, like he has a part in not necessarily softening her, because she doesn't.
No.
She that's what I really like about Claire's character, is she stays unwaveringly kind of stoic and quiet, and
she has to come to her own realizations. She learns her own mind, but that's not at the fault of a guy. Not the fault,
it was
not the doors of a guy.
I got more of the impression that it was from actually the conversation that she had with the other two.
Yeah.
But when they were saying like, oh, we've all been through this and we did this to kind of get through it. Maybe you need to do the same thing. And she goes, aha.
Yeah.
I shall do that.
What they did is they kind of stepped into the lives of their their poets in a way. They saw the real life elements of those poets, and that kind of allowed them to kind of fully realise their relationships with them and kind of pulled them back from the brink in a way.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember which girl was obsessed with Plath, but she went out to Plath's family home and kind of stood across the street and watched Plath's mother take in the food shopping.
Yeah.
And the other girl went to visit Sexton's grave.
What year is this supposed to be set in? Because
I looked at this because it was published in 82.
Right. So it's that kind of...
It's secret. It's probably earlier than the Secret History.
Yeah. But it's got that similar kind of vibe because it's not really big... It's not obviously big technology and there's not...
Yeah. 1982.
It's not the digital age yet, obviously.
It is not the digital age, no.
And I think that helps with a Dark Academia classification because you haven't got that digital influence.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
you can't just Google
slow. It. Yeah, it's slow media, isn't it? It's slower media.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to kind of connect with a dead person, you have to physically go and do something.
Yeah.
You can't just listen to a voicemail or, things like that. I think I was expecting more studying and more academic elements as well because, it says about how, they obsessively study and they're absorbed in the work and they kind of read their work aloud and analyse it and everything. And we get that briefly once, but all they really do is Claire reads the poem. That's her favourite. I
got the impression that we might, even though Claire was obviously going to be the focus, I thought maybe there'd be more of like a round robin type thing.
I wouldn't have been surprised at all if it had been split POV.
Yeah.
Something I didn't really expect was the centering of Julian and his kind of perception of Claire and the girls and like the unfairness brought upon him by his relationship with Claire that he pursued, that he maintained. She would have been fine to be like, yeah, I don't care. But he was relentless in pursuing her. He kept kind of forcing himself into her life. And then when she disappears off to the Aschers, she doesn't tell anyone, she just leaves. And refuses to answer his letters. And Claire's friends have, agreed not to give him any details. And he just whinges about it all the time, about how unfair and, how much he's been ruined by the Death Girls. Whereas it was all entirely his choice.
Yeah. But I think I find that on the flip side, though, if it wasn't for his persistence, where would we find Claire in the end?
Yeah. I think she probably would have left. Fine.
Yeah, but I think he kind of expedites the whole...
Yeah.
I mean, she even says, like, his turning up kind of, like, not necessarily ruined it, but kind of burst the bubble before she was necessarily ready.
But she was getting there, wasn't she? She was starting to think about going home and that her job had been done and they were,
Yeah.
that Lucy's parents were kind of living their life again without her.
Yeah.
I think it would have happened. He just pressed the go button.
Yeah.
Basically. And I found like it hard to kind of pinpoint like the passage of time. Like how long was she there? Like I know they mentioned at one point like, oh, it's been 2 weeks, and I was like, what? Like, it feels like surely it would have been like a month, 2 months. It's really hard to pin down the passage of time, and I guess that's kind of reflective of that brain fog bubble, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like when you are, in that depressive state, that the passage of time is different and everything moves differently.
Time passes really fast but really slow at the same time.
Yeah. And I think that is cleverly reflected in that. But it was a little bit baffling to read it as a reader.
Because when Julian does turn up and he's like, no, I mean, yeah, we'll talk about Julian anyway more in a bit, but he says, well, she has to go back to school now. And it's like, well, surely, in my head, she'd been there for like 3 months. And I was like,
exactly,
well, surely
like,
she'll have to
done
defer a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think it may have only been like 2 to 3 weeks. It's a long time for, not a long time even, for Lucy's parents to suddenly get over this death that they'd been struggling with for 3 years.
Yeah.
Just with the presence of another girl in the house. Like, yeah, it was an interesting choice of time passing, I think. Did you have any other elements that you wanted to discuss?
I think mainly it was just I just really liked how it kind of highlighted the fact that women's existence is still kind of belittled or brushed aside, or even when it's plain as day, like this woman is in pain and suffering, it's still misunderstood or misconstrued as something that it's not. Like, a woman's not allowed to have like an ennui situation. Do you know what I mean? Like, that she's not allowed to feel like a existential crisis in the same way that a man can. Yeah.
It's melodrama, isn't it? It's hysteria. Yeah. The classic hysteria.
It's when Naomi's talking to Julian, and Naomi's like talking about her own kind of relationship with Plath, because that's her poet. And she's talking about what Plath did, and then eventually how Plath took her life. And she says, I can't believe you don't know this already. I thought everybody our age did. Maybe it's a universal female thing. And then Julian he's like, no. He says, I'm not sure about that. And then it says, he knew many women who didn't reserve special places in their hearts for a favourite doomed poet. He didn't think it had to do solely with being female. He thought it had to do with being alone. Maybe women felt alone more often than men, or maybe women just let it show more often. Like, again, he kind of puts the focus back on himself. Like, well, maybe they're just more open about it, but poor me. I don't know. I just I thought it was clever because at the one hand he's sympathetic and he's sensitive, and he's obviously really interested in what Claire or Naomi or whatever have to say. Yeah. But he always manages to kind of not invalidate it, but
it is kind of invalidating,
I suppose.
Because Naomi has said this is a female experience, and he's saying, oh no, you got that wrong. I think it's more like this.
Yeah.
You know?
Everyone feels like that. It's not just about you, and then makes it about himself.
And says, you're wrong.
Yeah. I suppose so. I suppose we can kind of look at Julian's character a little bit more deeply. I think that he's an interesting character. There is more to that. I do think he's an interesting character in the sense that a lot of the time we're kind of forced to see it from his perspective, which from a book that seems to be centered around a lot of like female experience is really interesting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because that's one of the first thing that kind of made me shocked by the novel was Julian centering.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect it. I didn't want it almost.
Yeah, I definitely felt like that too.
But it does divert the perspective. And I think it does help make the three girls further away. It does distance you from them and kind of sets them apart as what they're experiencing is exceptional. Whether that is true or not, or whether they are more open about it, as Julian thinks. He's saying, from a man's perspective, these girls are nuts and they want nothing to do with me, so I want to know
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's that thing of like wanting the unattainable, isn't it? It's like this person is emotionally unavailable and also for the most part physically unavailable, because Claire is often described as, even when they're in bed together, as still tense, and like he can feel like the coiling of her muscles, as though she just won't relax. She's always like restless, and he's like, I want to be the one to fix this, or to calm her, to still her,
to unravel all
rather
of
than just letting her be.
Yeah. Or trying to help her meaningfully.
Yeah.
Out of a place of love. It's he went in with this gonna get in there and see what happens. And then he whinges about being ruined by her. Yeah. But I think that is a deliberate move on Wolitzer's part.
Yeah.
And her going, this is what guys do to girls who are in a vulnerable position. And then they turn it back on themselves. I think as well, where Claire and Julian are on the phone when Claire is at home, and he pushes her too far, and she shuts him down. She shuts him down and shuts him out.
Yeah.
And that's it. I think that's a really...
Yeah, I loved also that you
strong.
saw her like... You still saw her like hesitancy with that. She was like, "Oh, I know if I went back to him and made it all okay." Like, but she also knows that she wouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah, she doesn't want to, so she doesn't.
Yeah.
And then he forces his presence on her.
Yeah.
Doesn't he? Because she has said to Naomi and Lauren, "I don't want him to know where I am because he'll turn up. I don't want to reply to his letters because that's engaging him in a way that I don't want to." And then when one of the girls finally... I think it's Lauren, isn't it?
It's Naomi that talks to
Is it
Julian.
Naomi? They are so interchangeable. They're not fleshed out at all.
No.
The two girls. She gets worried about Claire because, she thinks Claire's kind of going too far. And she finally tells Julian where Claire is, and he turns up and is like, "I'm taking you home." It's that kind of, that male interference, that I know better than you, I'm here to rescue you, to take you back to normality. So he gets what he wants in the end, doesn't he? He gets to save the deaf girl. Even though she wasn't in any danger of committing suicide, she was in a weird situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's very nuanced, and it's a very cleverly complex kind of perspective for Claire, because I think on the one hand, it's not that she doesn't want that, she just doesn't need it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think, she talks about, at least said Seth then, crikey. She talks about Julian because she sees her brother in him. Like, she wants that kind of male...
presence.
Protective presence. So you get that in the way she talks about Lucy's father as well.
Yeah.
But she doesn't need it.
No. And I also think she wants it in a non-threatening way. Like,
yeah,
she wants it in a brotherly way, in a fatherly way, in that kind of, you've got backup if you need it. You've got someone to kind of distract you from these things. But she doesn't crave romance. She doesn't crave sex. She doesn't crave, a man on her arm walking around campus, It's a very platonic desire. It is a little bit unnerving the way she, sees Seth in Julian and then proceeds
her
with
and
him.
Seth's relationship is a little bit...
It's a little bit on the edge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't see much, but what we do is a bit, potential for ick.
Potential for ick, but he's also dying, and you're like...
Yeah. Like, that must have been confusing and scary and...
Yeah.
Horrific to watch. I think it's interesting the way she doesn't share that as well. She keeps him to herself, doesn't she, Seth?
Yeah.
And then Julian, when she finally tells him, he's like, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" As if, like, he's... what's the word? Entitled to her trauma. Because, how can he fix her if he doesn't know everything? That's kind of the vibe I got from his reaction to that. It's an interesting dynamic.
It is.
Not always in a good way. So the big question, is it dark academia?
No.
I don't think so either. It has elements, it has hints, but no, not for me.
It's a great moody book.
It is.
It's not dark academia.
No. I did really love it. I really, really enjoyed it. Though. But I thought for sure at first it was going to be full dark academia. But never mind. We'll try again next time.
We'll try again next time.
So our next episode is going to star Alex Michaelides' dark academia thriller, The Maidens, which was published last year.
You are invited to join the Maidens. The Maidens are Cambridge University's most exclusive society, whose members are selected by the charismatic professor of Greek tragedy, Edward Fosker, a secretive set of the brightest, most captivating students. When one of the Maidens is murdered, grieving young therapist Mariana Andros is drawn back to the idyllic campus where she was once herself a student. Because beneath the university's ancient traditions and beauty is a web of secrets, jealousy and lies, and when the killer threatens the person she loves most, Mariana will give anything to stop them, even her own life.
Dun, dun, dun. So I actually have read this. I read this last year and really, really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to giving it a reread, using our dark academia parameters and then discussing it with you. I'm curious to see what you think, because it seems to be quite a divisive novel.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting good vibes from the summary.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not really a thriller reader. It's not really my jam. But I really liked this. Really enjoyed it. So thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed talking about Sleepwalking with us. We'd love to hear if you've read the book, what you thought, whether you think it's dark academia. And we'll speak to you next time. Bye.
Bye.